Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another fun-filled, exciting episode of this podcast we lovingly call This Is Not Church. We should just call it like This Ain't Your Mama's Church, but that's that seems like a bridge too far, perhaps. But
yeah,
we are
maybe.
here. Maybe so. My name is Nat. I am here with my brother, John, who I will not ask to say hi because he just can't help himself.
And I will not say hi, John.
Good. See, we're already off to a good start. We have an amazing guest today. We're super excited to introduce him to you. Let me read you his bio real quick, and then we will jump straight head on into the conversation. So Jonathan Foster is the award-winning author of the following books. Books, guys, plural, man. This is amazing. Where Was God on the Worst Day of My Life? Death, Hope, and the Laughter of God, an unlikely title about the unlikely path where God finds us. That's a mouthful. Questions about sexuality that got me uninvited from my denomination. Which
I like that one.
Awesome.
I love that title.
I think I need to read that. Hope and is it the Melvin of humanity?
Yes, sir.
And other surprising short stories. All of these, if just based on title alone, I need to read. But apparently there was something of a breakthrough with The Reconstructionist, as it was his first book with less than 10 words in the title. I love it, man. He's incredibly proud of what's happening at lqve.org. I was going to try and pronounce it, but I don't think you can. When he's not with his family, he's reading Rene Girard or Open and Relational Theology, or both. To find out more about what he's up to, make sure to sign up for the e-newsletter at his website. And when you do, you'll receive some more of his writing, a classic win-win. You can make all that happen at jonathanforesteronline.com. Welcome, Jonathan Forrester.
Foster.
Foster. I said Forrester like 3 times, didn't I? Welcome, Jonathan Foster. Whoever that other guy is, he can go to hell. We're glad you're here.
If there is a hell, he can go there.
That's right. Well, I meant to put that up in air quotes. He can go to hell.
Right.
That would be like Poughkeepsie, wouldn't it? Or maybe LaGuardia Airport in the middle of the summer.
Could be a number of things.
It could be. Mm-hmm. Welcome, man. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here, and it'll be fun to chat about the book and whatever else we want to talk about.
Absolutely. So the new book is The Reconstructionist, right?
That's right.
All right.
That's
so
correct.
if you wouldn't mind, though, before we jump into that, would you just give us a little bit more about yourself? Maybe we like to ask people about their faith journey, kind of see what brought them around to this, current heretical phase of their lives, and see what we can glean from that.
Yeah, well, pretty standard in some respects. Grew up pretty legalistic, evangelical, middle of the country, Bible believing, third generation pastor's son. Both granddads were pastors, so I know John and I were talking earlier about how much we've been to church, and yeah, I lived that whole thing, and kind of just slipped into that family ministry kind of role, and felt like that's what I was supposed to do too. So I pastored, and when you pastor, and if you have any measure of intellectual honesty, all of a sudden you start to run up against people that have different thoughts than you have, and you realize, hey, there's a whole big world out there that doesn't quite fit into my category. So a lot of that was happening, and I was starting to question a little bit, and then we just went through a variety of different events, and the most intense one was when our daughter was killed in 2001 on January 15th, 2015, January 1. And so that really propelled me, that really fast-tracked me into what, a lot of us are calling deconstruction, and caused me to have to figure out how this all fits. So there's 100 different tributaries in there, but that's kind of a flyby.
Wow, that's it's interesting because I feel like I don't think it's not everyone's experience, but I do feel like crises do bring a lot of that stuff to the surface. My wife and I didn't lose our daughter, but she spent 7 months in ICU, and we very nearly lost her a lot of times. And man, I tell you what, we were already kind of in the questioning mode, but that really, like you said, fast-tracked everything. And as I've told people before, deconstructing in the midst of all of that is catastrophic at times. It's not something I would recommend because you're already kind of going through the shitstorm. But nevertheless, it is what it is, right? I mean, it just kind of makes you go, okay, well, where is God in all of this?
Yeah, it forces those questions, and it kind of removes, like for us, in some ways, obviously we're not thankful for the event, but in some ways you're thankful for the space that it created. It just carved out the space where it was like, well, what else really matters? I mean, what else are you going to do to me? I mean, this is obviously the worst thing. And so it kind of created this buffer of like, oh, okay, I really can question these things because it can't get any worse. You know, whatever I come up with here is not going to get any worse than that. So,
For sure.
so I'm kind of thankful for that space to be able to operate out of.
Yeah. And it doesn't it tend to just bring things into focus? Like you said, I mean, like, okay, yeah, there's all this stuff on the periphery that has demanded my attention, and I no longer care because this thing's demanding all of it.
Absolutely. And in terms of theology and what a denomination might think or what church members might think, it relegates all of that. Not that it's all completely BS, but it relegates a lot of it to just not that important.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's, for me, what it's done is just helped me refocus and reorient around love, because that was the thing that I just kept leaning into. And it turns out love is inexhaustible, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, thank God for that. Did you also find too, and I don't mean to spend too much time on this, but did you find that on the other side, not the other side, that sounds cliche, but on the other side of that, did you find that you had like a deeper reservoir of compassion for people who were grieving, having gone through that?
I think so. I think I like the deeper reservoir part. I relate to that. It's like something internally happened, and externally nothing changed. Well, other than the absence of our kid, but internally it's like everything got bigger, and it's helped me, I guess I would say it this way, to hold tension better.
Yeah, for sure.
I kind of really think is the point for human beings, and it's how I see Jesus now on the cross. I don't see him as on the cross trying to fix everything. I see him holding everything, those are completely different paradigms. So I love that whole piece of it, and it's really beautiful. It's really, really painful, and it's really hard to hold all of that, but it's also really good. So yeah, I relate to that. It helps when you interact with others. I mean, frankly, there's some days when you don't want to interact with them.
Absolutely, yeah.
But other days you're like, oh yeah, we're kind of all in this together, and this is what it means to be a healthy human being. So
yeah, I know. When we were going through what we went through, this was 2015 for us. 2015 into 2016, our extended stay in the hospital. We saw people come and go. Some, of their own volition, some not. And my wife got really good at spotting that look on somebody's face who just needed something. You know what I mean? Like a grieving parent can see a grieving parent a mile away. You can kind of go, yeah. And she got some level of comfort out of being able to be a comfort to others in that process and go, hey, listen, you don't have to have the answers here. It's okay. This is create space to grieve and create space to, like you said, hold intention. And that's where we ended up. I don't know where you are on this thing called theodicy. If you've come up with the answer, I'd really love to hear it. My answer is, I don't know. And there's an awful lot of tension between the God I think I know and my existential reality, which is sometimes it doesn't make any freaking sense. So, but I like that you said, I like that image of Christ on the cross holding things together, even in the tension, and saying, listen, you don't have to have the answers, but we can still live there, right?
Yeah, I think that's where life is lived. If, again, you can have intellectual honesty and be humble enough to realize it. And it's really hard, but there's a lot of beauty there. And I'm just kind of like, I dig beauty. So I just keep trying to find that. But it's not divorced from pain. So
no. Sadly, it can't be.
Isn't it interesting that the one place that we should be able to go and find that intellectual honesty and that loving, caring comfort, you would hope that would be church. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be the one place that just, first of all, just lacks intellectual honesty. And I don't mean to say every church, and anyone who reads that into what I say, I hope you understand that I'm not. You might be in that church, that one church in your area that's doing this right, but I think we all can agree that for the majority of churches, they absolutely get this wrong more often than they get it right. And we've all heard the platitudes. We've all heard the one-offs. We've all heard the sickening quotes they throw at us in our grief to try to, and I don't even think it's to make us feel better. I think it's to make them feel more comfortable, right? It's like, I'm not even going to say them here because all it does is make me angry when I hear them anyway. So I'm not even going to voice them, but we all have heard them. And, I find it sad that the one place that should be our safe haven, the one place that should be the place that will give us comfort and protection and honesty, gives us a lot of times the exact opposite. If that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a lot of insecurity in our churches and a lot of anxiety. And there's unfortunately, a lot of us have not been conditioned or taught how to process change. And, we think it's a certain set of beliefs, and if you get there, then life is just supposed to operate.
Right.
But it's not. And we all know that's the stupid thing too, is we all know that that's not true.
Well, and then we, like you say, people who get to the point where they have some intellectual honesty, they go through this thing that we have now called, for whatever reason, this is the word that sticks, deconstruction, right? You and I talked a little bit before we started recording that I started this process back in 1988. Deconstruction wasn't even a word on the radar. I didn't know what I was going through or the process I was starting, other than people saying, well, he's on the slippery slope, he's leaving the faith, those kinds of things, right? Which we are hearing again, actually, from some very big people in that conservative world, right? Because they've all of a sudden realized that deconstruction and people who are going through deconstruction, it's a thing, right? It's legitimate, and they don't know how to battle it. And so they're coming at it with all these, here we are again with these 12-step programs to help you through your deconstruction. And, God forbid at the end of this, you don't find yourself back in church, doing the same damn shit you were doing before. But that's the process that they think that you need to go through. Okay, go through your motions. But at the end of this, if you can't find God in the way we show you God is, then you've kind of lost your way.
So yeah, it reminds me, it's like the evangelical version of Rumspringa.
Yeah.
Go, sow your wild oats. You'll be back. You'll come back to the fold eventually. When you've gone out and done your thing and you've tilted at windmills, whatever you're going to go do, then you'll come back. I don't think most people do come back. At least not. I certainly wouldn't go back to where I was, 10 years ago. Hell, I wouldn't go back to where I was 5 years ago. But talk about this in terms of, you mentioned, or I read in your bio, an interest in open and relational theology, which I think comes perilously close to getting it right, at least in terms of if we can ever get it right. But in terms of dealing with the problem of God and suffering and what he does and doesn't allow and what he can and can't actually do. So does your book delve into those topics as well?
Yeah, the Reconstructionist, I don't expressly name open or relational stuff. I do write a lot about it and I live in it. I'm in the middle of a dissertation with my friend, Dr. Thomas J. Ord, who is the open relational guru.
TJO in the hizzy.
Yeah, that's right. TJO. But absolutely, that's influenced me a lot. And I kind of landed there. I took a circuitous route to get there. And I realized mostly when I started interacting with Tom that, I was already intuiting some of these things. And it's really helped me give some good language and some understanding to, how we might process, where the heck God is in the middle of this stuff and what the future, that there's no future because the future hasn't happened yet, which helped me a lot because then, God doesn't know every single thing that happens, but it's a different approach. He's with me. It's not like he's not prepared. I think he is prepared and he understands contingencies, or she or it, whatever it is. But that helped me a lot in this process too. So my dissertation is actually on open and relational and mimetic theory. And
wow. Okay.
I'm trying to bring them together. And sometimes they're like magnets that, are facing the right way. They come together nicely. And other times they really repel each other. So it's been super challenging, but
where would be some places, if you can think of one off the top of your head, where they would diverge, or they would be like just curious because I'm a fan of both of those things. The work of Rene Girard has influenced me tremendously, and I'm a novice when it comes to the open and relational stuff, except from what I've read and through guys like Ord and Mark Harris and others that I think articulate it very well. So,
well, in about a year, I'll be able to tell you this better. But here's a general idea. One of the places where they diverge, it seems to me, as I'm trying to work through it, is that as much as I love Girardian stuff, and for those listening, it's desire that leads to imitation, that inevitably leads to conflict, and then that leads to scapegoating because we've figured out how to move forward as human beings, and we process our violence by offloading all of our anxieties onto the back of the other person, and then we punish that other person. So that's scapegoating. And then for Girard, we've ritualized all of that, and so religion comes out of all of that. So when you really live with that for a while and you dive into it, there's a very I don't know the best way to say it, but it's like a very pessimistic.
Yeah, it's almost fatalistic, isn't it?
It's very fatalistic. It can be fatalistic and regressive. Like you get caught in this dysfunctional mimetic loop, and you it's like a broken record, and you can't get out of it. Because if you really take Girard at what he's saying, we have no desires. Our desires are mediated by the other. So at some point, though Girard, of course, never really says this. So I'm trying to figure out how it works out. But at some point, you got to figure out where agency and free will comes in. And so that diverges from open and relational stuff. With open and relational, it's this really beautiful idea that in every moment we get all the past, but in that moment we get options. Now, sometimes you might not get a lot of options. There may only be a couple, but there's always options. And then you get agency. You get to choose. It's not complete free will, I don't think. It's a limited kind of a free will, and we could get off talking about what all that might mean. But that's a little bit different than straight up mimetic theory, which puts you in this loop where you're screwed, and the only thing that can really happen is apocalypse. And unfortunately, with Girard, especially if you read his last book, it's a very depressing book, battling to the end. So I'm trying to work through all of that. There's a whole bunch of stuff to work through. There's some stuff where they converge, but that's one area where for me it diverges, and it's challenging.
But it seems also that, if you were to take a negative point of view of either one of these, you could become rather nihilistic pretty easily and say, well, and that's where I see something where there is some comparison, right, on the negative side. So, in Girard and mimetic theory, it's like, hey, we're destined, and this is in our nature. This is just how we're going to be. We're always going to do this. So why even give a shit? This is just, we can't fix this. It's never going to get fixed because it's in our nature. And then with open theology, again, if you take it to the negative, which I don't, I consider myself somewhat of an open theist. It's definitely, like Nat said, it's given me a lot of answers that I needed. But if you were to look at it from the outside from a negative point of view, it's like God is not in control. God doesn't do anything. Then it's all, again, it comes down to Girard, right? And it's all becomes mimetic, and it's all just, it's in our nature. And we're just going to, for lack of a better word, we're just going to fuck it up over and over and over again. And so I could see where both of these journeys, if you took them to the negative side, could become very nihilistic and just like, yeah, I'm just going to live through life and not care. I want to say though that I don't buy into either one of those. Those don't work for me. But I could see where someone could say, well, this is your ultimate path. This is where you're going to end up.
I think if you listen to any of the critics of either of these systems, that's what you'll get as a caricature of both of them.
Right.
That says, well, look at this, the way that they're missing all the nuance,
It's the same thing. It's the same damn stuff they do if you even remotely suggest that you are universalist, right? If you even remotely come into that world where there's any kind of universalist view in your theology, well, then why even try?
Yeah, or you're painted as a guy that's like, well, you just don't care about sin. Anything goes, and all roads lead to God. And you're the one.
Well, God forbid we ever bring up the word or the name Calvin and say, well, what about that?
Well, Calvin's God was universalist. He was just an asshole. Because Calvin's God could do anything he wanted. He just chose sometimes not to. So if we look at, I'm curious because you got me rabbit trailing on free will. I think that's my understanding of Girard's understanding of free will is that the idea of autonomy of pure autonomy is a myth. Like you or I we just can't. There's just no way we can make completely free autonomous choices based on, we're always making choices that are influenced by any number of things. So I used to think about it like when I used to take my kids out to a restaurant, I would hand them the children's menu and they could choose, but their choices were limited. Like here are the 4 things on the menu to give you the feeling that you have some choice here, but God knows I didn't put lobster on your menu. You didn't even know it existed. And so I wonder if there's some of that going on with our free will. I think as Brad Jersak says, he doesn't believe in free will, he believes in freed will, which means, which is a clever play on words. But as we get a better and better glimpse of Christ, and as we get a better picture and understanding of God, I think our choices do open up. But I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that's true. And I think the challenge is when you try to speak from a Girardian perspective is to nail him down on how he gets there too, because he definitely will say, that with Jesus, we have a picture of positive mimesis. We have someone who's imitating the Father. And so for him, the goal then is to imitate someone who is imitating Father God in this case. But it's tricky at other times to figure out how he thinks that can be done in the midst of so much of this mimetic contagion that has affected all of us. Because at other times, again, it can be very negative. And so I'm trying to figure that out. I'm trying to articulate that. And that's probably what my next year will be spent doing, trying to reconcile that with what he believes, but also what open relational is a much more positive, possibility oriented thing. So I've been enjoying trying to figure out where I land with that and live in the tension of it, because I'm not sure any of it is none of it's a problem really to be fixed. It's a tension to be managed. So there's something kind of cool about getting pulled both ways.
What really resonates with me most about, and especially when I read through, I keep bringing up Ord and Mark Karras, and there are others obviously as well, but those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. Greg Boyd is in the mix there too. And I like the way it's presented as a very participatory thing. Like, listen, this is so much of the evangelical Christianity I was raised in was not that. It was, God speaks, you act. That's all there is to it. He's God, you're not. And open relational theology to me is an invitation to participate. And, so I like this notion of conspiring prayer. I like this notion of, hey, listen, this is not, loft your prayers up to God and hope he does something about it. It's an invitation to say, okay, how can we do this together?
Yeah, and very much a reality that God is affected by how we live and the choices that we make, and he's impacted and influenced. And how could he not be? Otherwise, if he wasn't, then prayer would be completely pointless. And if he wasn't, then he would not be an enjoyable person or a God or a thing to be around. So relational implies so many things, from the micro to the macro, that everything is connected and interconnected, and that God lives in the nexus of all these relationships that are pulsating and vibrating. Which, by the way, back to Girardian, Girardian and actually his psychologist friend is a French guy. I always mess up his name. They coined the phrase interindividuality. So interdividual and relational, those are pieces that, converge and overlap, which is super interesting too. So there's so much truth to that. It seems like that a lot of people, whether they're believers or not, recognize that we are really interconnected and relational, and that if there is a God, it has to make sense that he or she is relational too.
But it keeps coming back to this phrase that you said of being, having intellectual honesty, I think. And because when it comes to things like prayer, and the way I was raised in the churches that I went to, the God that I prayed to, at the end of the day, has to be a monster, because this God is picking and choosing which prayers are going to get answered and which prayers aren't. And again, if you just take a moment and step back and look at this can't be how this works, because there are times where I know people in the church who I would say, when I was within that faith, and I would say these are God-fearing, honestly open believers of their God, and they die of cancer, or they got hit by a truck, but they've been praying, God protect me, God protect me, God. And at some point, God chose to turn away and not protect them, right? So they have to, if they really just sit down and think about the God that they're praying to, they have to come to this realization that this God is a monster. It doesn't care about you in any way, shape, or form. Unless you say the prayer the right amount of times. If you just said it, you said it 7 times. If you'd said it 8 times.
Well, there's units of prayer, John, and they have weight. You have to make sure that you get the right weight, and you can tip the scale. It becomes
like a pyramid scheme, right? You prayed, and you got these 2 to pray for them, and you got these 4 to pray, but you just didn't get the pyramid down far enough.
Religion is the ultimate Ponzi scheme, isn't it? But intellectual honesty is in short supply in a lot of areas, and sadly, I think to be fair and I try to be fair and generous. I still have lots of friends who were well within the church. I don't think there's a lot of malevolence there. I think they've not been taught, and they've just been given a bunch of pat, glib answers over the years that most of those things don't survive the first real crisis. So those people that I know who are the biggest proponents of a God is in control or all things work together for all that stuff, all the cliches that we can pull out. Yeah, typically I can look at their lives and go, man, just wait. I'm not wishing anything bad on you, but this is life, and some shit's going to hit the fan at some point that's going to really make you question some of this stuff. Because we all don't live these charmed lives where we remain untouched by tragedy. And that will, if you're intellectually honest, force you into some hard questions.
Well, we could use this pandemic that we're all in right now as a really good litmus test of exactly what that looks like. I mean, how many times have we had people who are just out and out deniers that this is an issue, and then they come on and do some video on Facebook or TikTok, or it's like, hey, I was wrong. This crap is real.
Or someone does it for them because they're dead.
Right.
But they double down, John. That's the lack of intellectual honesty. Is that they come back and they double down. But let's get back to the book, though. Then, so the Reconstructionists, we got off on that's not what this is all about. This is all just fun stuff. I talk about Gerard all day long with anybody who cares to listen. So, but I don't want to rabbit trail. I want to make sure we get into the meat of what this book is dealing with. So, give us the Cliff Notes version, and we'll ask some questions, man.
Sure. Well, for 50% of you who haven't read it, here's what it's about.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah.
I'm the 50% who didn't read it. All right. I'm sorry. I will someday.
It's obviously a play on the word deconstruction, and it's reconstruction. And I wrote it, first of all, I wrote it for myself. I mean, to be honest, because writing is how I try to make sense of things. So it was really helpful for me. But then I also wrote it for, in particular, like my boys and lots of young people within our faith community and others I interact with. Because I kind of felt a responsibility to try to reconstruct something. It's not, the point isn't for me, though I think for some people it is. And there's probably a whole bunch of stuff to talk about there. The point for me isn't to just blow things up. I like blowing things up. That's always fun. It's fun to shove some dynamite somewhere and watch it. And sometimes it's needed. But I kind of felt like, since my role over the years has been a pastor, I haven't called myself a pastor. I call myself a lead follower. But as a lead follower and as a dad, I kind of just felt like I should keep trying to work at this thing till I can actually push through some things and to reconstruct. And so the Reconstructionist is this whole, it's symbiotic. Like, they're two sides of the same coin. Deconstruction one side, reconstruction the other. But it's an effort to not, and this taps back into Girardian stuff, but to not get caught up in the deconstruction is so highly flammable. And so it's an effort to not just be consumed myself while I tear things down, and to really, really try to figure out, okay, is there hope here? And so, I landed on a few things that I thought gave me hope, and hopefully it'll give a few other people hope too.
For sure. Can you give us what's an example of something that has that you're clinging to? Because I know I'm writing a book as well, so I may just steal some ideas. But
where do you think I got my stuff? I stole all of it.
We all stole from somebody. Yeah. But I'm working on the last 2 chapters, and my book is about deconstruction. Crazy, I know. But that's the milieu in which I live. It's where I've spent the last 10 years of my life, just kind of. And I'm like you. I took a flamethrower to everything. Because I like blowing stuff up. And sometimes, like you said, it's necessary. Some shit just needs to get blown up. But a conversation that John and I had with Bayo Akomolafe not too long ago has not left me. I mean, that guy wrecked me in a couple different ways, in really good ways. I mean, the guy's amazing and he's a genius. But we talked about reconstruction. In a sense, he didn't use that word. But we talked about the pitfall and the folly of rebuilding systems after we've torn something down and missing an opportunity sometimes to rebuild something completely new because we're so fixated on getting back to what we think is normal. And so he was speaking in terms of COVID, like, okay, we're so quick to get back to the business of normal life, whatever the hell that is, forgetting that normal didn't work, actually. Normal was actually terrible.
Normal is what gave us what we have.
Right. And so why would we want to ever go back there? So we don't, out of my deconstruction process, and I've already seen myself gravitate a couple times back and I have to cut myself, go, no. Actually, we've done that before. Just because you put a new name on it doesn't mean the underlying systems and structures aren't still the same. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm rummaging through everything. I think Phyllis Tickle, quoting somebody else, said that every 500 years or so, I love the way it wasn't her quote. I forget who she was quoting, but she said essentially about every 500 years, the church holds a huge rummage sale and just gets rid of all this useless crap. But then over the period of the next 500 years, we go and find it again and buy it again. So she was speaking at the very beginning of what would become the great emergence, you know what I mean? Which would become the emerging church, which I think she thought that was the movement that was, I don't think it was. I think this might be. And we may look up in 5 and 10 years and realize I'm full of crap too, and there's something else on the horizon. But do you feel like there's that groundswell of like, listen, something foundational is actually happening here?
Well, to be clear, when you said this might be, you were talking about my book.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think your
absolutely.
book might be.
This might be it.
This might be it. I mean,
what I heard you saying was there is a groundswell, there is a movement, and who knows? I don't know. No one knows the future because the future hasn't happened yet. So we have an opportunity in front of us that if we could just be humble and have the courage and have love and have faith to be able to reach out and try some new things. This really could be it. Or we could do what you were saying. We could just rebuild right over the stuff and try to patch things up and Band-Aid things.
Yeah. And that was the image that we kept coming back to. Like, I just want to plug the holes, let me just put my finger over the hole.
It's really hard. I mean, and I think all of us and listeners too can give ourselves space and grace to name that it's difficult because it's like, and this isn't original with me, and I don't remember who said this, but something along the lines of like learning a new language. I mean, we can either learn new language or we can rehabilitate old language. So learning new language is really hard, especially when you get older, as any of us know who have tried it. Your brain has to rewire to learn this stuff. So that's really hard. Or we can rehabilitate old language, but that's also hard because then your brain has to stop when you say a particular word, like all these different theological words. You have to stop and tell yourself a lot of times, before it becomes natural that, oh no, love, like for me now, when I think of love, I automatically think of non-binary, non-violent, non-scapegoating love. That's completely different than what I thought 5 and 10 years ago. I just thought, oh, love. And I don't even know what I thought, but going non-binary, non-violent, non-scapegoating, that starts to put some really, definite things to it. But that was rehabilitating that word. It's really hard. So there's hope, but it's going to take, God's not going to do it for us. I don't even think God can do it for us. I think she wants to do it with us, but it'll take a real commitment to being able to work through some stuff. So to try to answer where you started to go with the preceding, the initial part of your question, which is what do you have? I landed on 3 things. So what I finally realized that for me, that my entire deconstruction journey could be filtered through 3 things. And I didn't set out to try to make them be filtered through that, but as it turned out that's what worked. And the first was I decided that the text is greater than people. And the second was that mercy is greater than sacrifice. And the third was love is actually greater than fear. And so every conversation I had, either inside the voices in my own head, because as we all know, that's the half of what's going on, or with the people in my church or the people in my denomination that, were so wound up and so anxious about some of these conclusions I was drawing. I realized we're all about either fear or sacrifice or Bible worship, text worship. So that's what the Reconstructionist winds up being about. It's about me saying, hey, here's this ridiculous thing that happened to me while I was trying to be a pastor, a lead follower, which was absurd to do that all in real time. And some days I genuinely still don't know if it had just been better for me to step aside and let the thing happen. But we tried to keep moving forward. And so in the middle of this absurdity, here's this earthquake of stuff that happened. And so I came back, and instead of rebuilding the same old stuff, I tried rebuilding something new. And it took us in a whole new place.
That's amazing. No, it sounds an awful lot like the journeys of a few people I've talked to and myself, where we've deconstructing while going through a crisis or deconstructing while pastoring a church can lead to all kinds of fun stuff. You know what I mean? We talked to Paul Bergman, who was doing that. He's burning the whole effing thing down while he's leading a church. I talked to Jeff Turner, who's gone full-blown atheist while he's still pastoring his church. And he's like, I don't even believe in God. He's like, for a year or two, or however long he went through this process of like really just trying on atheism to see if it fit. You know what I mean? He's like, believe it or not, he's like, I never once lied in a sermon. I everything I said, I believed. But man, it was, so out of that, he writes The Atheistic Theist, which is a beautiful book and amazing. But so, it is, I'm not sure it would have been better for you to walk away. I don't know if that crucible of having to go through that while trying to lead and pastor a church is, I don't know. I'm not sure it can be replicated anywhere else. Did you find, because for me, it lent a sense of urgency to the thing, where I might have otherwise been like, well, this can take its time and it can resolve itself. I'm like, yeah, but I got a sermon to preach on Sunday. I can't stand there and, say things I flat don't believe. So there was this push to get to think through it maybe more fervently than I would have otherwise.
Yeah, I think so. I think a sense of urgency about it is a good way of saying it. It really, it forces you, I don't like that word. It invites you again with honesty to really think through deeply what you're saying and the implications of those kinds of things. And you're probably right. I'm about 53% like we probably did the right thing. But I could be persuaded the other way.
Well, yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean that there weren't, and I know I'm speaking for myself, that doesn't mean that there weren't people who were injured in the process.
Right.
That I was maybe not as clear. But you know what? One thing that I've deconstructed entirely is this notion that a pastor has to know everything, and I labored under that pressure for so long. In fact, it's why I came to ministry so much later in life, was because I'm like, I never felt qualified to do it. And then there was this overwhelming expectation that you needed to know your stuff, man. And what I found was that what that does is set up this false dichotomy of the parishioner pastor dynamic that says you learn and I teach, which is an unhealthy. I mean, I don't understand. We've got to get rid of that structure anyway. That hierarchical thing of I'm the teacher, you sit there and listen, I speak. And so I don't know. I do know that when it came to, I had friends who were theologians and not pastors who I felt like at times could be a little more cavalier about the stuff that they wanted to say, because they didn't have to live with the implication on Sunday morning, and they didn't have to. I was trying to bring people. I'm trying to bring people along. I don't need to just go toss grenades into their belief systems just for the hell of it, So I do think it lends itself to being a little more thoughtful in how we craft these ideas. And like you said, maybe think through them a little more than you might otherwise before you just sort of rattle some stuff off. And but I mean, was that your experience similar to that?
Yeah, very much. And recognizing that for me, especially the last 7 years, my boys who are now 20 and 25, they were growing up in this. And I took that really seriously. Like I wanted to, not that they have to be Christian, but I wanted to at least give them every opportunity to recognize that, no, actually, it's a really beautiful and honorable thing for a human being to adapt and to change and to not be frozen and stuck in some preconceived idea that everything's supposed to be static. And so, yeah, but a lot of people don't want that. Some people do get it, but a lot of people at church don't. And I'm not, that's really hard.
Yeah, it is tough. I know that I have boys who are similar in age. My youngest is about to be 22, and I've got another one that's 24. So I wanted for them, if they ever rejected Christianity, to have at least rejected truth. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want that. I mean, I've rejected that. So most of the stuff we talked about that they're like, I don't believe this, I don't believe that. I'm like, good, you shouldn't. It's crap. Don't believe that. But I don't want you rejecting, I just want you to have the right information and then make a choice one way or the other. That's your choice to make. But I gave my son, my older son, when he was about 18, I think I gave him Love Wins to read through. And he was already working through some of the stuff on his own. And he looked at me, he's like, well, what's the big deal about that book? I never believed in that crap anyway. I'm like, oh, you're so far ahead. You're so much further ahead. That's amazing. I read that and I was blown away. I'm like, this is so new,
Yeah, our kids, we talk, my wife and I talk about that all the time. Our kids it's so great how much has changed for them in even a generation's time. So there's a lot of really difficult things that generation has to deal with, but I find that most of them are processing things much more quickly than I ever did. So that gives me a lot of hope for them.
Yeah, none of my kids were raised in any kind of faith. I basically, because I was going through this at such an early age, I didn't bring up my kids in any kind of faith at all. But they have come to some conclusions that took me a long time to get to, and they got there on their own because they're intuitive. They understand things in a different way than I think our generation did, and I see that as a very positive thing. A lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about the upcoming generation and how they want to label them as misguided, and they lack any kind of initiative. And I call bullshit on most of that anyway. I think I was talking to someone at work the other day because there's this whole like workforce, right? This upcoming workforce is hard to get motivated, and I don't think that's the case. I think that they want you to be transparent. They want you to be honest. They want you to be open. They are smart. They are super smart, and they can see through your bullshit in about half a second. And if you're not willing to come at this at a level of like, hey, I'm going to be ultimately transparent to you. I'm learning this too as we go along. I don't have all the answers. They don't want someone who comes up and says, I have all the answers. Do what I say, do what I do, and you're going to be fine. Because they can look and see how we've messed up time and time again. And what they're saying is when it comes to things like the environment, when it comes to politics, when it comes to the LGBTQ community, when it comes to the people of color, they get it on such a different level than we do or did, and took us so long to get to where I think they just kind of intuitively are. And I think there's a lot to learn from them if we just shut our mouths for a minute and listen to what they are saying about what they saw our generation and generations past do to get to the point where we can, that we can say, I'm 51 years old, and I kind of bring this up a few times. I'm just now to the point where I can say, the way we treated the people of color in this country is just horrific, right? I've always believed that, but I haven't had a way of vocalizing it. Whereas my kids' generation are just like, yeah, this is all bullshit. What you guys are doing is just wrong. And can't we just do better? I mean, it's such a simple concept, but they seem to just grab onto it so much easier than we do. And I don't really have a question in any of that other than Yeah, I know. I do this a lot, don't I?
I said all of that to say this. I don't have a question.
I actually wasn't even going to go down that road because you guys were talking about, this idea of deconstructing while in faith. And so this all kind of just connects for me. And I do have a question in that. And that is, Nat and I were pastoring or associate pastoring in churches where we were not necessarily in line with the pastor. And Nat and I had this connection where, I'd message Nat and say, "Hey, I watched your sermon that you were allowed to preach." And I saw you walk up to a line and take a step up to that line and then step back.
Mm-hmm.
And then Nat to me will say, "Hey, I watched you preach. I saw you walk right up to that line and take a step back." Because he and I talk on a regular basis on where our beliefs are, right? And we know that we want to say so much more, but we're within a situation where we have to kind of hold back. Did you have, as you were going through all of this and as a preacher, did you have people that you could go to and say, "Yeah, this is what I'm saying, but I actually believe this much more," as you were working through this? Did you have a safe community that you could go to?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, I definitely had a therapist that really was super helpful for me. And so I was able to process and, again, tapping into what we've already talked about. It was a process of grief that I was trying to work through, not only of our daughter, but then the grief of realizing that I needed to let go of some particular theological things. So that was a super important space. There was a friend or two that I could do that, but beyond that, not a lot, because my old church setting was in, an older it was in an older paradigm. And so it didn't really have a lot of, outlets for me. It didn't have a lot of spaces for me to connect. I tried connecting with a few other pastor types because I knew it was the right thing to do, but it didn't go well. In particular, especially when stuff got going around LGBTQ. In particular, when that started coming up, the anxiety level just went through the roof. And so it was impossible. So that was a very challenging thing to do. But I don't think I'm the only one. I think a lot of us feel that way. And I think a lot of people would relate to what you were saying. Thank God for the internet in that respect, because there's places that you can, in spaces you can find people and books to read. And yeah, so that's kind of what I did.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sure it wasn't, I can't get into Mark Zuckerberg's brain and what he was thinking when he set up Facebook. But I mean, it really was this cool idea that you could make private groups, right? Where not only could only the people who were in that group see what you're writing, if depending on how they set it up, other people couldn't know if you were in that group or not. Mm-hmm. And as you're stepping through these deconstructions, and working through it on your own, it was kind of a safe world to be in, where you could be amongst friends, amongst like-minded people, and maybe people you didn't really want to know that you were asking these questions. They didn't have to know until you were more comfortable. Because like you bring up LGBTQ, so I would consider myself affirming for most of my life just because of the environment that I was kind of pushed into at a pretty young age. So I ended up around a lot of the LGBTQ community pretty quick and fairly young. So I had to question a lot of what my church had said about, that group of people pretty young, and have to come up to this conclusion that the church was pretty wrong, or very wrong, absolutely wrong on this group of people. That doesn't mean that I felt safe saying it for a very long time, right? I had my opinions and I had my version of what I thought was true, but I kept it to myself for a really long time. And it wasn't until I'd say in the last couple of years where I feel super comfortable not giving a damn what people think when I say that I'm affirming, 100% affirming. There is absolutely nothing wrong with a single person in the LGBTQ community when they come out and they tell the world who they are. Absolutely, that's a beautiful moment for them. But I mean, did you find that to be the case too, that there was like this level of, and it doesn't have to be about that. It could be about we could make that about so many other things that the church has issues with as we are labeled progressive, right? As we back and support certain groups who the church seems to ignore, the marginalized a lot. Did you find that there were these steps where it was becoming a little easier and easier to be affirming for these groups?
Yeah, I think so. You start to pull at that thread and you realize all these things are kind of interconnected. And for me, yeah, it just kept coming up, and I was uncomfortable with what my denomination was, how they were framing the whole thing. So I tried to be proactive. I actually went to our denominational leadership and I said, here's what I'm thinking. I know it's different than we think, but among other things, I said, why don't you just think of me and our church as kind of like this little experiment. Let's try something new, because we all know this isn't going to go away. And I even tried to give them the option of kind of like, you guys don't even have to own what I'm saying and thinking. You can kind of keep an arm's length for a while. And if it gets really bad, then let's cross that bridge later. But so we didn't even have that option, because they went straight to, his first question was, are you in or are you out? And that was about 10 minutes into the conversation. So, yeah, it wasn't hard. Once I started getting language and I rehabilitated certain things and I learned new language around certain things, it was not hard for me at all to say, good Lord, LGBTQ plus human beings are human beings. And first of all, even if I did think it was wrong, if I played by your guys' rules, your rules are supposed to be around grace. So even if I did think it was wrong, why not? Why can't we just give them grace? So, of course, it didn't take me long where I realized I didn't think it was even wrong. I think, there are 4 verses, maybe 6, out of 31,000 verses in the Bible that talk about 4 passages, I should say, out of 31,000 verses that talk about homosexuality. And reasonably intelligent people have come to the conclusion that we're not really sure what these things say. So, again, it's intellectual honesty and trying to have humility. And so it was, once I got the language, it was pretty easy for me to say, this is the right thing to do, to just lead with love, and we'll figure out all this other stuff later. But church couldn't do that, by and large.
Well, and it's interesting because if you base it off of frequency, right? You go, well, okay, how often does the Bible speak of love? An awful lot. How often does Jesus himself speak of love? So you start to think about, I prioritize things based on maybe the frequency with which, the scriptures deal with it. Never mind the fact that we're talking about a fraction of a percentage of all of scripture even. And then add in the fact that we're probably not even really talking about the same thing. We're being very anachronistic when we think that what Paul's talking about is what we're talking about. But it just, I don't know, man. And Jesus never says a damn thing about it.
Right. And then you can do exactly. And then you can use that argument against them, because they, like, I believe this is in your book when you talk about, there's a phrase you say where Jesus speaks on hell more than, fill in the blank, right?
Yeah. Which is utter horse crap.
Which is not true. But okay, let's use your own logic against you then. Jesus never calls out homosexuality ever, not once. And the Bible itself calls us to love 1,000 times more than it calls us to. So, using their own argument where like this idea of frequency, right? That it's the amount of times it's talked about. Well, then all we should be doing is loving one another.
Yeah. So what I think what I mentioned in the Reconstructionist is that actually Jesus does talk about hell he might talk about it more than anyone else.
Yeah.
But it's irrelevant, because the hell he's talking about is not the same hell that all of us are thinking of in the 21st century.
Right.
Right. Our imaginations have been formed by Dante and Milton and by Hollywood and by retributive punishment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so he's referring to Gehenna. He's referring to the place outside the valley that was the place where the foreigners and other pagans had, which I find really interesting. Among other things, it was notorious for being the place where children had been sacrificed.
Yeah.
So as I processed and worked out of penal substitutionary atonement, which is that God needs children to be sacrificed, I found it very interesting that Jesus was talking about the place of hell as one of the places where children were sacrificed. And I started connecting those dots. That was super interesting. Of course, no one in the denomination liked that when we did that.
Well, no, because now you've now you've hit on one of the linchpins of evangelical theology.
That was a linchpin. So that was a really big deal. And what was the other thing you said that made me think of? You talked about hell and.
Well, we were just, I was using their own argument against them because they like to say that, using that argument that, well, Jesus talks about hell more than anyone else in the Bible. So hell must be a legitimate, real thing we need to worry about. Well, using their own argument, then, one, Jesus never talks about homosexuality as a sin, period.
Oh, and that's what I want to talk about. Because Jesus actually does. He doesn't talk about it as a sin, but he does mention the eunuch. And I was so shocked to discover a few years ago that probably, now there'll be different people listening to this who will land in different areas. So what I like to say is, like, reasonably intelligent people have come to some understanding. There may be a little bit of movement here, but reasonably intelligent people who've done a lot of work on this have come to the conclusion that when Jesus used the word eunuch, that was a general term offered up in the ancient Near East that kind of brought together a lot of different, what we might call anomalies. So it was kind of outside the normal pattern. It didn't just mean someone who had their, reproductive organs altered by removed or whatever. It didn't just mean that. It was a general term. And if that's the case, when Jesus says, some are born this way, some are made this way, and whoever can handle this, basically, handle it, like, that's remarkable, in particular, when you place it in the trajectory of Scripture that goes from, like, the Leviticus guys saying, nope, eunuchs are out. Isaiah saying, actually, they may have a place. And then Jesus saying, hey, whoever, he doesn't speak condemnation. And then Philip ministering to this eunuch who probably becomes the first missionary to Africa.
Right.
Like, that is mind blowing. So that whole thing, when people say Jesus never talked about it, actually he did. And it was probably in a really positive way.
Yeah, you're correct.
Ooh, that's good. We should take an offering right now. Yeah, that's good.
We just, John, hold up. We just had church up in here.
Well, I can't even remember where I heard it, but I've actually heard this discussion, and I'm embarrassed that I don't remember it because you're correct. And the argument that they had made, and I kind of falling into that camp, is that Jesus is saying, okay, so some people are born different than you, for a lack of a better description, right? And it's such a clunky version or description of that because it makes it sound like there's an us and them, but Jesus is basically saying, because he says some are born this way, some are made this way. And if you take it at what Jesus is saying, it's like, yes, however you are born, whatever way you feel about your gender or your sexuality or any of that, that's fine. Because you were made that way. You were made in the image of God. So however you feel in your soul and in your heart is who you are. If you feel you were born as a woman, but you feel like a man, you feel like I'm not either. I don't know where I fit in this. That's fine. And that's such a beautiful thing. And I don't know why we get so fixated as a church on this need of this binary of male, female, right, wrong, clean, dirty, whatever you want. However you want to fit it in. It's so aggravating. But it comes down to, I was just kind of looking over the chapters of your book because I think those are some really interesting basic ways to look at it. And the one that, the third part of your book, which is love is greater than fear. And we just talked about it. How hard was it to get to that point where you had the language to affirm, right? And it was that point for me, and you can answer it for yourself, where love became greater than fear. I no longer feared what people would say about me for saying that these people are also children of God. That the love was greater than the fear.
It's so good. And I didn't mean to downplay that earlier when I was talking. Those are challenging things to be able to evolve to the point where you realize you can now verbalize, what you really feel, especially when you're doing it in a public kind of a setting. There were, for about 2 years there, on Sunday mornings at our Sunday morning gatherings where it was a pretty common thing for me to say something out loud and in the back of my mind go, oh, wait, do I actually think that now? And so then I would have this whole other conversation going on, which doesn't make for a very good, sermon presentation, probably for the people. I mean, maybe that was the problem with the church more than anything, but for sure, that was really challenging. I do remember specifically saying a few things over the years where, and over the months where as soon as I said it, I thought, yeah, this is right. Like this aligns with the kind of God that I think helps our world. You were just speaking of you were struggling trying to figure out how to categorize people who were different, which just speaks to the sensitivity that you have to the situation. But the reality is that in a lot of different ways in life, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, sexual, there does seem to be kind of a general way that most people operate, but there are always, always, always anomalies. My friend, Dr. James Allison, who is a gay Catholic priest, which is hilarious and awesome combination. He calls homosexuality a non-pathological variant. It's this anomaly that it's not pathological. It's just an anomaly. And we see it in all things in life. And so to be able to, when I would say things, that rang true to me. And then I would be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I would feel the vibration with that. It felt so good. I remember the Sunday specifically when I said, I don't fear God, which in my tradition, you would never say that. Because again, for me, fear had to be rehabilitated, or sometimes I would just have to use different language. But I was like, oh no, I actually don't fear God. And if you read John chapters 3 and 4, actually, if you do fear, you may not have ever experienced love in the first place. And so I would have people coming to me as soon as the gathering was over, telling me or texting me or emailing me or dialing up our message online and then, letting us know what I said wrong. And I realized, why would I even want to listen to these people? Because they may not have ever experienced love in the first place. According to the Bible, they're operating by fear.
Right.
So, yeah, that was a good one. That was a good.
I love that.
Yeah.
It reminds me, there's a St. Anthony said, so go back to one of the church fathers, says, I no longer fear God, I love him, and perfect love casts out fear. So I've said the same thing you've said before and gotten the same feedback and pushback. I'm like, I don't fear God. We get the beginning of wisdom is fearing God. I said, well, okay, fine, granted, maybe that might very well be the beginning, but a mature faith knows there's nothing to fear. So
yeah, that's a good way of saying it. It's the beginning. Yeah.
The beginning, right? We might start. It's kind of like that. If you take someone who's never seen the ocean and you take them to the coast of Northern California and show them a wild and rugged, especially if you take them on a day when it's choppy and windy and the waves are kind of out of control, that can be a little daunting. You know what I mean? Like it's wonderful and it's gorgeous and it's all this stuff. And there's this sort of underlying sense of terror. Like you could get sucked into that thing and never be seen again. It happens how often, John? Dozens of times a year.
It just happened not that long ago. Yeah.
I mean, people go and look at this thing and go, oh, it's so amazing. And then next thing you know, they're, whew. I mean, we'll find them a month later in some tributary. But
why'd you ask John? Does he have like running statistics on this?
He does.
I'm in Northern California.
I'm the color guy. He's the stat guy. He still lives in California. But yeah, but anyway, that I have that sense of God sometimes that, okay, this is a wild, whatever God is wild. Whatever God is vast. Whatever God is, you could easily get lost in. And yet I'm still just enamored of the whole thing.
Did you also find that as you delve deeper and deeper into this idea of love and the love of the other and the love of God for all humanity and all creation, that as it's casting out this fear, that the things that you were afraid of no longer cause you fear? I mean, and I've talked about this before too, this dread of being left behind, right? With the whole dispensationalist idea of the whole left behind idea. And, the nights of just sleeping in sheer, or not sleeping, laying in my bed in sheer terror of being left behind. the sheer terror of I have displeased God in some way that I am not going to make it to heaven. That I am going to see the destruction of all mankind in my lifetime. And then as I build up this love towards humanity and all creation and everything in the universe, and all those fears slowly slip away. I no longer have this fear of death that I had. I no longer have this fear of, the angry taskmaster God who's coming after me because I didn't ask for forgiveness for all of my sins today. And I get to the point where I can just bask in the glory and the love of this being, be it God, be it he, be it she, be it they, be it the universe. I don't know. I don't have a name for it anymore, but I no longer fear it. I love that it loves me. I love that I can love it. If any of that resonates at all.
Yeah, it's really beautiful, man. And I think that humanity would be so much better off if we could figure out how to tap into that. And that's it's a tiny little bit of what I'm trying to do with the book and where I'm trying to go. And I don't know exactly how to say it other than I'm a little bit concerned about how much energy has been put around deconstruction. It's fueled by anger, and because I don't want to suggest that there shouldn't be anger. There should be. We should be angry at some of the stuff. But hopefully there can be enough of us older guys like us who can help younger people recycle that energy back into love. And it's really challenging. It's really hard.
One of the things that's really helped me with this, because I did kind of push back at this whole idea of reconstruction. It's like, why would I want to reconstruct anything? I've deconstructed it all. I've torn it all down. I don't want to reconstruct.
Yeah, I've experienced that a lot.
But what a lot of the people inside the church who are so against this whole idea of deconstruction anyway, is that they have pushed this idea on us, or in general, that there has to be a point where deconstruction stops and reconstruction starts, and you rebuild. And what I have come to the conclusion of, and I think Nat is too, is that these two things can happen at the same time, and that it will be a continual process, and it may never end. But you got to be willing to look at the things that are worth saving and worth salvaging and worth moving forward. And so I am in a place right now, and again, Nat and I have said this, I don't know how many times, that 5 years from now, I might say that I was flat out wrong. But right now, this is where I'm at, is that deconstruction and reconstruction are happening simultaneously. And you have to allow that to happen. You have to be able to be willing to see that there is stuff that's salvageable and savable within, I don't want to say religion, because I'm not a religious person anymore, but I do have faith. And I do have a spiritual connection to something. But that's kind of where I'm at.
I think that is really helpful and important to acknowledge. I think they're two sides of the same coin.
Right.
And that I hear that too. I hear a lot of people who, from the folks who are probably being led by anxiety and fear more than they would want, saying essentially, when is this deconstruction going to get over? When are you going to get onto something that you can land on and or get back to what we had? Well, of course, we've already established we don't want to get back. But the truth is, you never really quite land. I try to talk about that some in the book. And I talk about, even with, we could talk about with evolutionary biology, and how stuff is always kind of falling apart. But at the same time, even though there's entropy, at the same time, there is stuff that's complexifying. So it's falling apart, but it's rebuilding,
right.
In mathematics, there's a guy, I forget his name off the top of my head, who, developed this theory of that nothing is really stable. Everything continues to fall in on itself. So whether it's mathematics or biology or love is like that, because it's so endlessly fascinating me to try to figure out how to articulate it, because love, it seems to me, is wounded. And so you go into the wound and now you're vulnerable. But there's nothing stable about that. But as you fall into it, you realize there's a depth there. There's this interior depth that opens up. Oh, actually, this is stable. in its own kind of way. But then that falls into something deeper. And so it's like this fractal, kaleidoscopic giving way of love into love into love that never quite stays the same. But when you think about it, it's the only thing that runs through the fabric of the world in such a way that it could be strong enough to hold everything together. So it's the most vulnerable spot, but it's also the most powerful spot, though I'm hesitant to use the word power because I'd like to, I need to rehabilitate that word. So it's deconstruction and reconstruction, yes, at the same time. And I'm not a philosopher, but I do think that starts to get at what Jacques Derrida, who was kind of the father of the deconstruction movement, French sociologist from the previous century, was getting at. I do think for him and for certain people, there's real strength to that, to the reality that it never quite ever stops. But of course, that freaks our well-intentioned religious people out big time because they don't know they don't have any identity if that's the case.
Well, as we're getting ready to wrap up, because we've been chatting a while, but I just want to say this one thing as you're talking about love and pulling in on itself. I recently made a post online. It's one of those weird moments, right? So I make my coffee in a very specific way. I foam my non-dairy milk alternative with my sugar-free syrup because diabetes, and that's the world I live in. But so I foam this up, right, and it creates all these bubbles. And my daughter's actually taught me that if you take the cup and tap it, all the bubbles pop. But I don't. I'm always in a hurry to get my coffee. I don't worry about tapping my mug to make all the bubbles pop. So I have this mug that's full of this foam, and I just pour my coffee over that and let it kind of fill. But I was sitting there watching as I'm filling up my coffee with a pour over, and all these little bubbles are being pulled towards the center of where the coffee's pouring into the foam. So all the bubbles are pulling in, kind of like a black hole pulls in light. So it's pulling this into itself as it's filling. And I was like, this is love. This is exactly what love is. Love pulls in as you pull people into your circle of love, they are pulled into this idea of love. But as it's pulling in on itself, it's also filling, and then it fills and it overfills. And then this overfilling of love is spread across the universe. So it's just this.
Or across your countertop.
Or across my countertop. Yes. But
just in case you were taking yourself too seriously, I
like that. That's really nice.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I was going with that post, is like this whole idea of pulling in on itself, but at the same time filling. And they work together. They work at the same time. So that's my parting thoughts. I'm not going to say wisdom because I'm not wise, but my parting moment.
I like it.
You've been compared to Gandalf at least once on the podcast, so
yeah, that's true.
You should own that. So, man, I actually have your book on my tablet right now, and cool. I will read it. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
I appreciate so far what we need to have you back one day and talk about your other books, because just the titles alone are like, oh, we need to talk about that.
I know
what the heck is. So that sounds amazing. Has your book dropped? Is it out available? Okay,
yes.
It is.
Yeah. As of this recording, it was last week.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
great.
We're 1 week into it, and it's gone relatively well with Choir Publishing.
Okay. And
glad those guys took a chance with me. And so you can find it at all fine digital retailers everywhere.
Oh, look at it. All fine. That's all fine. Yeah. You just don't want to say that one word. Don't do it. Buy your books from the local retailer if you can. But no, that's great. Do me a favor. We get a lot of feedback from people in our private group who are like, sweet Jesus, every time you guys have a podcast, I put another book on my stack. I'm like, good. Support these guys, man. They're doing the Lord's work. Lord knows they're never going to get rich doing it, but we could at least sell a few books.
That's right. That's right.
So we're gonna make sure there are links available to everything in the show.
We also need to say, I mean, we there's a fine line between giving away a book, right? When you're talking about a book, we don't want to give away too much. We want people to buy the book.
That's right.
So we have honestly, as the 50% who has read this book,
Yeah.
Easy now.
We have not touched on a lot that's in this book. There is so much that we didn't even, we talked a little bit about Gerard. We talked a little bit about, we kind of just completely glossed over a whole chapter that the second part of the book, which is mercy over sacrifice. We didn't even talk about.
Good.
You know what? That means we just need to get together again.
Yes.
And do this
And
again.
I would 100% love to do that.
Yeah. And just want to say thank you for taking the time and chatting with us. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate what you're doing with this book. And like Nat said, I got now a whole stack of books I have to add to my list. And just your titles alone make me want to read all your books. So
thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye, y'all.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.